I never thought the worst humiliation of my life would come at 85 years old. But it happened that summer afternoon in Boston, right in my brother's backyard, under a white tent decorated with red and gold balloons. Before I begin, I want to mention that the Mama True Story channel is having a $200 giveaway to celebrate our subscribers. I can hardly believe so people are interested in this old lady's stories. To participate, it's simple. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, like this video, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, a little about yourself, or share a beautiful story. I'd love to know who you are. Now, let's get back to my story. The sun was sharp, the music was lively, and all around me stood 200 guests, professors, Harvard graduates, family members, and neighbors. Everyone was dressed in their finest suits and gowns, sipping champagne like they were celebrating royalty. My brother, Thomas, had just received his PhD from Harvard University. He was the golden boy of the family, even at 87. And me? I was nothing more than the old woman they called the dropout. When they handed me the microphone to say a few words, I didn't realize it was a trap. Thomas's daughter, standing at the podium, smirked as she introduced me. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "this is my Aunt Eleanor, the 85-year-old who never even finished high school." The crowd burst into laughter. Laughter that burned like fire in my chest. I heard someone whisper, "Can you imagine? A dropout living all these years in her brother's shadow." Another voice chimed in, "No wonder she looks so bitter." My own daughter, Rebecca, chuckled and shook her head as if to confirm the insult. My legs trembled, but I forced myself to stand tall. I looked around at the polished faces, professors with expensive glasses, colleagues in tailored suits, all of them entertained by my disgrace. It wasn't just the words that hurt. It was the years behind them. The decades of sacrifices no one cared to remember. I gave up my education to care for my sick mother. I worked 3 jobs to make sure Thomas could stay in school. But that afternoon, all of those sacrifices were erased with one cruel joke. And here's what stung the most, they all believed it. They believed I was nothing but wasted potential, an old relic who had achieved nothing. My heart pounded. My cheeks flushed red. And for a moment, I thought about walking away. But something inside me told me to stay. Stay, Eleanor. Watch. Listen. Remember every laugh. Because deep down, I knew life has a strange way of flipping the script. As the applause for Thomas thundered and champagne glasses clinked, I kept my silence. I let them have their fun. But in the corner of my mind, I whispered to myself, this isn't over. They will regret mocking me. Every single one of them. And here's where I turn to you, my listener. If your own family laughed at you, mocked you in front of strangers, treated your sacrifices like garbage, what would you do? Would you stay silent like I did, or would you rise and fight back? I didn't know it then, but the phone call that would change everything was already on its way. A call from Harvard itself. And when it came, every single person in that backyard, my brother, my daughter, those professors, would fall silent. But before we get there, you need to know why that moment mattered so much. You need to know the story they never cared to hear. The laughter didn't stop after that introduction. It lingered in the air like smoke, choking me, following me with every step I took across the lawn. People I barely knew, Thomas's colleagues, professors from Harvard, wives and husbands of scholars, looked at me with pity in their eyes, like I was some kind of broken experiment that had failed decades ago. I sat down at one of the long white tables draped with satin cloth, but the whispers reached me anyway. She's the one who never finished high school, right? Yes. Can you imagine? At her age, and she never went back. What a waste. Her brother must have carried the whole family. Each word cut me deeper than a knife. Across the table, Rebecca, my own daughter, leaned toward her friend and whispered something that made them both laugh. She didn't even try to hide it. I wanted to believe she was better than this, but in that moment, she looked like a stranger. The same woman I had raised on my own, sacrificing sleep, meals, and even my youth, now embarrassed to be my daughter in front of these people. I gripped my napkin so hard I thought it would tear. It wasn't the first time my family had made me feel small, but it was the loudest. I had been the quiet backbone for years, the caretaker, the one who cooked, the one who cleaned, the one who made sure everyone else got their education and chances. Yet when it came to me, they rewrote my story as a failure. Do you know what it feels like to be erased while you're still alive? To watch your name be dragged through the mud by your own blood? I lifted my glass of water, trying to stay calm. But then I heard Thomas's booming laugh across the yard. He was telling a story to his colleagues about how he was the first in the family to taste true education. He gestured toward me with his glass and said, "Poor Eleanor, she always hated school. Couldn't last past the 10th grade." That was a lie. A bold, shameless lie. I loved school. I was a straight-A student. I dreamed of Harvard long before he ever did. But when our mother fell ill and our father left, someone had to step up. That someone was me. I left school to care for both of them, and to work so Thomas could stay in his precious classrooms. Yet here he was, rewriting history to make himself look brighter and me smaller. The humiliation sat in my stomach like poison. Still, I kept my face steady. I didn't argue. I didn't rise to defend myself. Not yet. Because here's the thing, sometimes silence is the sharpest weapon. I wanted every single one of them to think I had accepted their version of me. I wanted them to relax in their laughter, to believe they had broken me. That way, when the truth arrived, it would hit them like a thunderclap they never saw coming. And I'll ask you this, my listener, if the people you sacrificed your whole life for turned around and spit on your name, would you forgive them? Or would you let revenge write the final chapter? I had already made my choice. They laughed at me like I was born a fool, like my whole life had been nothing but laziness and wasted years. But the truth? The truth was far more painful, and far more complicated. I was 16 when my world crumbled. Our mother fell sick, cancer, they whispered, and our father walked out the door one morning and never came back. Thomas was already enrolled in prep school, on his way to the future everyone dreamed for him. Me? I was the one left to pick up the broken pieces. I still remember the day I put away my textbooks. They smelled of hope, of possibility. But I folded them neatly and slid them under my bed. I told myself I would return to school after Mama got better. She never did. Instead, I worked. Morning shifts at the diner, afternoons cleaning houses, nights at the local grocery store stocking shelves. While Thomas sat in classrooms with polished desks and chalkboards, I wiped sweat off my forehead and counted pennies for rent and medication. And here's what no one at that party understood, Thomas's education wasn't free. It was bought with my calloused hands, with the hours of sleep I never had, with the dreams I buried alive. When Harvard sent him an acceptance letter, the whole family celebrated like it was a miracle. But I knew the truth, it was my miracle. My sacrifice. I could have screamed that in their faces that afternoon in Boston, but what good would it have done? They didn't want my truth. They wanted their story, the one where Thomas was the star and I was the dropout who never loved learning. Funny how easy it is to erase someone's sacrifices once they no longer serve your narrative. I carried that silence for decades. I carried it through nights when I wanted to cry into a pillow but couldn't because I was too tired to even cry. I carried it through raising my own daughter, Rebecca, who never once asked why I hadn't gone back to school. Do you know what it's like to feel invisible even inside your own family? To watch people succeed with the foundation you built, and then watch them pretend you never lifted a brick. That's what I lived with. A lifetime of shadows. And yet, in those shadows, I grew strong. Maybe I didn't have degrees hanging on my walls, but I had resilience carved into my bones. I had wisdom the hard way, not from books but from survival. But survival has a price. It takes pieces of you, little by little, until there's nothing left but silence and bitterness. Sitting in that backyard, hearing Thomas retell history as if I were nothing, I felt every year of my sacrifice piling up on my shoulders. But here's the thing about shadows, eventually, light finds its way in. And that light, the one they never saw coming, was about to turn their laughter into silence. Now let me ask you, if you had given up your own future to build someone else's, only to be mocked decades later, what would you do? Would you swallow it, or would you take back your power? I was done swallowing. Thomas stood in the center of the backyard like a king on his throne. His gray hair was combed neatly, his tailored suit pressed without a wrinkle. Even at 87, he carried himself like a man untouched by struggle. His colleagues surrounded him, glasses raised, voices loud with praise. Dr. Miller, they called him. The pride of Harvard. A true inspiration. And each time they said his name with that title, Doctor, I felt a twist in my chest. Not because I envied his education, but because I knew how much of my life had been spent building that title for him. Every speech that afternoon painted Thomas as a self-made man. He worked so hard, one professor said. He's proof that persistence and discipline pay off. I wanted to laugh. Persistence and discipline? He had those, sure. But what about the sister who had held down 3 jobs so he could focus on nothing but his studies? What about the girl who had given up her youth so he could chase his dreams? Funny how success stories always leave out the names of the people sacrificed along the way. Rebecca joined in too, clinking her glass. My Uncle Thomas, she said proudly, is the kind of man our family looks up to. He's the reason we value education so highly. Without him, where would we be? Where would we be? I almost stood up right then, almost shouted across the yard, you'd be nowhere without me. But I didn't. My silence wasn't weakness anymore, it was strategy. As the speeches dragged on, Thomas beamed like a boy at his first awards ceremony. His voice carried as he told stories about himself, how he always knew he was meant for greatness, how his sister Eleanor never cared for books but always supported him. His words twisted the truth into something unrecognizable. I saw guests nodding, smiling, believing every lie that rolled off his tongue. And for a moment, I wondered if maybe they were right, maybe history really does belong to those who shout the loudest. But then I caught Daniel's eyes from across the yard. My grandson sat quietly at a table in the back, watching me, not Thomas. His face was serious, almost protective. And in that look, I found something I hadn't felt in years: validation. Someone still knew the truth. Still, the celebration pressed on. Toast after toast. Compliment after compliment. They stacked Thomas higher and higher, building him into a monument of success. And all the while, I sat there, invisible, the shadow that had carried him all those years. But here's what they didn't realize: shadows are patient. Shadows wait. And when the light shifts, shadows reveal what's been hidden all along. I sipped my water, letting their laughter wash over me like acid. Every word they spoke, every lie they told, every glance they threw my way as if I were nothing, I stored it like ammunition. Because when the truth finally came, it wasn't going to whisper. It was going to roar. So let me ask you, the one listening now, if the world cheered for your betrayer and forgot your name, would you sit quietly? Or would you wait for the right moment to remind them who you are? My moment was closer than anyone in that backyard could have imagined. Before we continue, I want to mention that the Mama True Story channel is having a $200 giveaway to celebrate our subscribers. To participate, it's simple. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, like this video, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, a little about yourself, or share a beautiful story. If strangers laugh at you, you can brush it off. If colleagues whisper, you can ignore them. But when the betrayal comes from your own child, it carves deeper than anything else. That afternoon, I thought I had already endured enough. Thomas's speeches, the professor's whispers, the smirks that followed me wherever I moved, I thought I had taken the worst of it. But then Rebecca stood up. My daughter, my only child. The girl I had carried for 9 long months, the one I had raised alone after her father walked out, the one I had worked double shifts to feed and clothe. She stood there in her silk dress, her hair pinned back neatly, her jewelry glittering in the sun. She looked every bit the successful corporate woman she had become. She lifted her glass and smiled. I just want to say how proud I am of my uncle, she began, her voice smooth, polished. He's been such an inspiration to all of us. Growing up, he was the model of discipline, education, and ambition. I braced myself. I knew where this was heading. And, well, she laughed lightly, as if she were telling a harmless joke. In every family, there's the one who sets the bar, and the one who doesn't. My mom, she turned toward me with that same smirk I had seen on Thomas's face earlier. She never finished high school. But she always told me to dream big, even if she didn't. The laughter that followed wasn't gentle. It was sharp, cruel, and knowing. Professors chuckled behind their glasses. Relatives covered their mouths as they laughed. Even some of Rebecca's own friends snickered like schoolchildren gossiping in the back of a classroom. My heart stopped. Do you know what it feels like to have your own flesh and blood strip you bare in front of strangers? To watch your daughter erase your sacrifices and package them as a joke. I wanted to shout, Rebecca, how dare you? Do you know who stayed up nights sewing your dresses for school when money was too tight? Do you remember who stood in the rain outside the office to beg for a secretary job so we could keep a roof over our heads? Do you remember the woman who skipped meals so you would never go hungry? But my lips didn't move. Instead, I sat there, frozen, while the weight of her betrayal pressed against my chest like a boulder. Rebecca continued, her voice sweet like honey but dripping with poison. Still, I guess her story shows us something. You don't need to be educated to raise a child who succeeds. And for that, I'll always be thankful. That line landed like a final slap. To her, my life was reduced to nothing but a cautionary tale, the dropout who somehow managed to raise someone better. I lowered my eyes to my lap. My hands trembled, but not from shame this time. From anger. From the fire building inside me that I had buried for far too long. It wasn't just Thomas who had stolen my story. My own daughter had turned me into the family's punchline. But here's the thing, betrayal has a way of clarifying everything. In that moment, I realized I didn't just want respect back. I wanted justice. I wanted every single person in that backyard, professors, relatives, my brother, my daughter, to see the truth of who I really was. So I ask you, listening now, if your child mocked you in front of 200 people, would you forgive? Or would you show them a side of you they never knew existed? For me, forgiveness was no longer an option. And soon, they would learn that the woman they mocked wasn't the dropout at all. As the laughter died down and the speeches turned back to Thomas, I kept my eyes lowered, holding my breath just to steady myself. My own daughter's words still echoed in my ears like a cruel melody I couldn't shut off. But then I felt it, a gentle hand brushing mine under the table. I looked up, and there he was. Daniel. My grandson. At 22, he was everything I had once dreamed of being, sharp, curious, full of ambition. He was a student at Harvard, sitting at the back of the tent among his friends. Yet unlike everyone else, he hadn't laughed. Not once. His dark eyes burned with anger, not at me, but at the injustice of what had just unfolded. "Don't let them get to you, Grandma," he whispered, his voice steady but low enough that only I could hear. "They don't know who you really are." For a moment, I almost broke. Tears pushed against my eyes, threatening to spill, but I swallowed them down. I couldn't let them see me cry. Daniel leaned closer. "I told my professors about you," he said, surprising me. "About everything you've done." They were amazed. I frowned, not sure I understood. "About me?" "Yes," he nodded. "Your community work. The literacy programs you started at church. The local library project. Grandma, you've taught more people to read than some professors in that crowd. You just never bragged about it." His words stunned me. I had spent years running those programs quietly, volunteering at the library, organizing book drives, tutoring children who had fallen behind. To me, it was just a way to give back, to pour what little knowledge I had into others. I never thought anyone noticed. Certainly not my own family. But Daniel had noticed. And that was when I saw it, the difference between him and the rest of them. He didn't see me as a dropout. He saw me as the woman who carried wisdom in ways a diploma could never capture. "Grandma," he whispered, squeezing my hand, "Harvard doesn't just honor scholars. They honor people who change lives. You've done that. Don't ever forget it." His words lit a spark in me. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming the truth of my life. For so long, I had let others write my story, Thomas, Rebecca, even strangers. But Daniel reminded me that I still had a voice. And here's the irony, while my brother basked in applause for his degrees, it was my grandson who showed me the real meaning of legacy. Not in titles, not in accolades, but in the generations we inspire. I glanced back at the crowd. They were still toasting Thomas, their laughter spilling across the lawn. But inside me, something had shifted. I wasn't broken anymore. I was waiting. Patient. Ready. Daniel's loyalty had given me strength, but it also made me wonder, what had he told those professors exactly? Why had they looked at me so curiously earlier, as if they knew something the rest of the family didn't? I didn't have the answer yet, but I felt it in my bones. Something was coming. Something that would shake this backyard celebration to its core. And so I ask you, the one listening now, when the world labels you a failure, but someone you love believes in you, who do you trust? The crowd's laughter, or that single voice of loyalty? I chose Daniel. And that choice would change everything. When the noise of the party blurred into background chatter, I found myself drifting into the weight of my own thoughts. It wasn't just the laughter that hurt me that afternoon, it was the reminder of all the years I had spent invisible. Regret is a heavy thing. It doesn't just sit in your heart. It crawls into your bones, your skin, even your breath. And for me, it had lived there for decades. I regretted the textbooks I put away at 16, still fresh with the smell of ink. I regretted the lectures I never sat through, the essays I never wrote, the dreams I folded neatly and stuffed under my bed like they were nothing but clutter. I regretted the nights I walked home in the rain after long shifts at the diner, too tired to even untie my shoes. Nights when Thomas was tucked in a dorm bed, his book spread open under the glow of a desk lamp, while I scrubbed dishes until my hands cracked. But most of all, I regretted my silence. I should have spoken up years ago. I should have told Rebecca that her education was not hers alone, but the product of her mother's sacrifice. I should have told Thomas that every diploma he framed on his wall was paid for by the sister who gave up her own. Instead, I stayed quiet. I told myself it was humility. I told myself it was love. I told myself my silence was strength. But silence has a cost. And mine had made me disappear in my own family's eyes. Now, at 85, I looked around that backyard and realized I had been erased. In their version of the story, I wasn't the sister who carried the family. I wasn't the mother who bled for her child's future. I was just the dropout, the one who never finished, the one who wasted her life. Do you know what it feels like to live long enough to see your story rewritten as a joke? I do. And yet, regret didn't destroy me. Not completely. Because sitting there with the sting of my daughter's words and the echo of my brother's lies, I felt something else stirring inside me, something stronger than regret. Anger. Anger that I had allowed them to bury me alive under their version of history. Anger that my years of sacrifice had been tossed aside like scraps. Anger that even in my old age, when respect should have been mine by right, I was still treated as less. But anger, I realized, is only wasted if it burns in silence. That afternoon, as I listened to the clinking of glasses and the endless praise heaped on Thomas, I made myself a promise. My silence was ending. My regret had lived long enough. And here's where I turn to you, the one listening to my story. What do you do with your regrets? Do you carry them like chains until they drag you into the ground? Or do you sharpen them into weapons and use them to carve your way back into the light? I had carried mine long enough. It was time to use them. And soon, everyone in that backyard would see the truth I had buried for decades, truth that would turn their laughter into stunned silence. The music softened, the crowd hushed, and someone tapped a spoon against a glass. A toast, they cried. All eyes turned to my brother, Thomas, as he stood tall in the center of the backyard, a glass of champagne in his hand. Even at 87, he had the energy of a man decades younger. His voice carried with ease, polished by years of lecturing in classrooms. He smiled, the kind of smile that makes people lean in, expecting wisdom. I want to thank all of you, he began, his tone gracious, for celebrating this achievement with me. To earn my doctorate at Harvard is a dream come true, and it would not have been possible without the support of family. For a moment, my heart softened. Maybe, just maybe, he would acknowledge what I had done for him. Maybe he would tell the truth. But I should have known better. Thomas raised his glass toward me, his grin widening. "And let's not forget my dear sister Eleanor," he said. The crowd clapped politely. "She's been, how shall I put it, the comic relief of our family story. The one who never finished high school, but always reminded us that not everyone is cut out for books." Laughter erupted. Professors chuckled. Relatives snickered. Even some of the younger guests nearly spit out their drinks. He wasn't finished. Of course, he continued, her sacrifices were endearing, in their way. She may not have worn the cap and gown, but she taught me something important, what failure looks like up close. The words hit me like a slap across the face. Failure. That's what I was to him. That's what I was to all of them. The laughter grew louder, bouncing off the tent walls, wrapping around me like chains. My chest tightened, my throat burned, but I refused to lower my eyes. Not this time. I looked straight at my brother as he smirked, basking in the applause of his cruelty. Do you know what it feels like to be laughed at not by strangers, but by the person you once loved most in this world? The boy you once carried on your back when he was too tired to walk. The brother you once defended against bullies? To have him turn your entire life into a punchline? That was the moment my anger stopped being quiet. I didn't speak, not yet. But inside, I was screaming. Inside, I was swearing that I would not die with this humiliation carved into my story. I glanced around the backyard. Some faces still laughed, but a few looked uneasy, almost embarrassed by his cruelty. And then I caught it, Daniel's eyes again. My grandson's face was tight, his jaw clenched. He didn't laugh. He didn't smile. He looked ready to explode. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't alone. Still, I sat in silence as Thomas finished his toast with a flourish. So here's to success, he declared, raising his glass higher. May we all chase it, and not settle for excuses. The crowd cheered. Glasses clinked. My humiliation was complete. But the thing about poisoned words is that sometimes they poison the speaker too. And my brother had no idea that the story he had tried to bury was about to rise from the grave, in a way that would silence even the loudest laughter. So I ask you, listening now, if the world labeled you as the failure in your family, would you accept it? Or would you wait for the moment to turn the joke back on them? I chose the latter. And that moment was closer than they thought. The laughter still rang in my ears long after Thomas's toast ended. Guests clinked glasses, smiling as if cruelty were a form of celebration. My humiliation should have been complete. By every measure, I should have been broken. But then I began to notice something odd. Not everyone was laughing. Across the tent, a group of Harvard professors stood together near the buffet table. Distinguished men and women in dark suits, their expressions didn't match the rest of the crowd. While others laughed at my expense, these professors watched me with sharp, curious eyes. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But then one of them leaned in to whisper something to the others, and they all nodded. Their gazes flicked back to me, not with ridicule, but with recognition. Recognition of what? I shifted in my chair, uneasy under their attention. Did they know something my family didn't? Did they see through the lies? Daniel caught my eye again and gave me the faintest nod, almost as if to say, "Do you see it now, Grandma?" They know. My heart quickened. And suddenly, pieces started clicking together. The week before, Daniel had asked me endless questions about my past. About the community programs I started, the tutoring I had done, the literacy drives that helped hundreds of kids in our town. I thought he was just making conversation, maybe trying to distract me from my worries. But what if he hadn't been? What if he had told someone? The more I looked at those professors, the more convinced I became. Their eyes weren't mocking. They were assessing. Measuring. Like I was someone they already knew, someone they'd been waiting to meet. Meanwhile, my brother continued basking in the glow of his own praise, oblivious to the shifting energy in the crowd. He laughed too loudly, raised his glass too high, certain that the day was his alone. But I could feel it now. Something was turning. I didn't know exactly what Daniel had done, or what those professors had heard, but I knew in my bones that the story my family had written for me, the dropout, the failure, the comic relief, was about to crack open. And here's the truth, nothing terrifies people who thrive on power more than the moment they sense the power slipping away. I saw it then in Thomas's eyes. For the first time all afternoon, when he noticed the professors looking at me, his smile faltered. Just for a second. But I caught it. The flash of worry. The silent question, why are they looking at her and not at me? It was the beginning of a shift. A small crack in his perfect facade. And I savored it. Because humiliation is heavy, but recognition, even the hint of it, can be enough to keep you standing. So I sat taller. I held my head higher. And I let those professors look at me, really look, until the whispers grew louder, and the laughter started to quiet. And that's when I knew, my moment was closer than I had dared to hope. So let me ask you, listening now, if the very people your family tried to impress suddenly turned their eyes on you, what would you do? Would you shrink away? Or would you hold their gaze, daring them to see the truth? I chose the latter. And it changed everything. At first, I thought maybe I was just imagining things. But soon, I realized it wasn't in my head at all. The whispers had changed. They weren't about my failures anymore. They weren't mocking. They were curious. I caught fragments as the professors moved around the tent. "Is that her?" one of them murmured. "Yes. I think so. She's the one he told us about. Her work is extraordinary." I didn't know she was related to Thomas. Extraordinary. The word clung to me like a lifeline. For decades, no one in my family had used words like that to describe me. I was the dropout, the one who never finished, the wasted potential. Yet here, from the mouths of Harvard professors, came something different. I glanced at Daniel, and he gave me a subtle smile, proud, secretive, like a boy who knew a surprise was about to explode. My heart pounded. What had he told them? What had he done? The whispers spread quickly. I noticed more faces turning toward me, no longer with smirks but with interest. It unsettled the rhythm of the party. The applause around Thomas began to falter, and for the first time all afternoon, he seemed rattled. He raised his voice louder, telling another story about his discipline and achievements, but fewer people were listening. Instead, they were looking at me, the woman he had just called a failure. One professor even walked over to Daniel, placing a hand on his shoulder. Their heads bent together in conversation, and I saw the professor's eyes flick toward me again, almost with admiration. Admiration. I could barely believe it. Meanwhile, Rebecca shifted uncomfortably in her chair. She was quick to notice the change. "What's going on?" she whispered to her friend. "Why are they looking at my mom like that?" Her friend shrugged. But I saw the unease on my daughter's face. For the first time, she looked less like the polished corporate woman and more like a child who had lost control of the story. And it hit me then, this wasn't just about Thomas anymore. My entire family had built their pride on erasing me. But the foundation was cracking. Do you know that moment when a storm is about to break, when the wind shifts and the air feels heavy with something you can't see yet? That's what it felt like. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My silence was no longer weakness. It was power. Every second I stayed quiet, the tension grew. Every time a professor's gaze lingered on me, the whispers got louder. And for the first time that afternoon, I wasn't the one shrinking in shame. Thomas was. He cleared his throat and tried to laugh it off. "Ah, don't mind them," he said, forcing a smile. "My sister's always been eccentric. She likes to volunteer here and there, nothing serious." But it was too late. The current had already shifted. The whispers had changed, and whispers, when they spread through the right crowd, have the power to topple even the tallest thrones. And so I ask you, the one listening now, if you were mocked and erased, but suddenly the truth began to surface, what would you do? Would you cling to silence a little longer, or would you rise and seize the moment? I was ready to seize mine. And it was coming faster than anyone at that party could imagine. It happened when the party was at its loudest. Glasses clinking, laughter bouncing off the white tent walls, Thomas soaking up every ounce of attention. People were still toasting him, though their voices carried less conviction now, their eyes darting toward me when they thought he wasn't looking. And then, my phone rang. The sound cut through the chatter like a blade. A sharp, insistent chime that made heads turn. I fumbled for it in my purse, embarrassed. Normally, no one would care about an old woman's phone ringing, but something about that moment felt different. The laughter stopped. Even Thomas paused mid-sentence. I glanced at the screen. The name glowed so bright I almost dropped the phone. Harvard University. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. Rebecca leaned over with a frown. "Mom, turn that off. Don't embarrass yourself further." But before I could, Daniel stood up quickly. His voice rang clear across the tent, "Grandma, answer it." The professors nearby froze. Their eyes widened, and a hush fell over the yard. 200 people, silent, waiting. My brother forced a chuckle. "Really, Eleanor, you don't need to take calls in the middle of my celebration." But I pressed the green button anyway. My voice shook as I whispered, "Hello?" On the other end, a deep, calm voice spoke. "Mrs. Eleanor Miller? This is Dr. James Caldwell, Dean of Harvard University. I hope I'm not interrupting." The world tilted. My lips parted, but no sound came out. Dean Caldwell continued, his voice warm but firm. "I wanted to inform you personally that the Harvard Board has voted to award you an honorary doctorate. Your decades of work in literacy and education have impacted lives far beyond what most of our faculty accomplish. It is long overdue recognition. I could barely breathe. My knees trembled. Around me, people stared. Rebecca's jaw dropped. Thomas's champagne glass slipped in his hand, spilling golden liquid across the grass. I also wanted to confirm, the dean went on, that we would like you to attend our honorary commencement ceremony next month. Your story will inspire generations. Congratulations, Dr. Miller. Dr. Miller. I closed my eyes, savoring the words I had waited my whole life to hear. The silence in that backyard was deafening. The same people who had mocked me minutes ago now looked as if the ground had split beneath their feet. I whispered back, my voice steady now, "Thank you, Dean Caldwell. I'll be there." When I ended the call, I lifted my head high. The phone still in my hand, I looked out at the sea of faces, professors, colleagues, relatives, my daughter, my brother. All frozen. All stunned. Do you know what it feels like when the truth finally rises and strikes like thunder? When years of silence suddenly roar louder than any lie? That was my moment. I had been the dropout, the failure, the family's comic relief. But in a single phone call, the world shifted. And I wasn't done yet. So I ask you, listening now, if the people who mocked you fell silent at your triumph, would you forgive them? Or would you let them sit in the silence they created? I already knew my answer. For a long moment, no one breathed. The call had ended, but its echo lingered in the air, louder than any laughter that had filled the yard that afternoon. 200 faces stared at me, wide-eyed, waiting for me to speak. The same mouths that had laughed at me minutes before now hung open in disbelief. I rose slowly from my chair, my hand steady now, my spine straighter than it had felt in years. I held the phone at my side and let the silence stretch. Sometimes silence is more powerful than words. And in that moment, I wanted every single one of them to feel the weight of it. Finally, I lifted my chin. "That was Harvard University," I said, my voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the air. "They have decided to award me an honorary doctorate for my work in literacy and education." Gasps rippled across the yard. A fork clattered onto a plate. Someone muttered, "You're kidding." But I wasn't. I let the truth hang there, shimmering like glass in the sunlight. Daniel's face broke into the widest smile I had ever seen. His friends whispered excitedly, clapping him on the back. The professors at the edge of the crowd nodded knowingly, their eyes warm with approval. And then I looked at Thomas. His face was pale, his smirk gone, his mouth working soundlessly as if words had abandoned him. For decades, he had been the golden one, the pride, the success. And now, before all his colleagues, his sister, the dropout, was being honored by the very institution he had worshipped his whole life. Rebecca's eyes were wide, her cheeks flushed red. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. For once, she had no clever remark, no polished line. I continued, my voice steady. For years, I was told my sacrifices meant nothing. I was called a failure, a dropout, a burden. But the truth is, I built something far more powerful than a diploma. I built opportunity for others. And Harvard saw it, even when my own family did not. The silence deepened. I could almost hear the sound of shame filling the air like smoke. Do you know what it feels like to watch the same people who mocked you turn stone-faced with regret? To watch their laughter curdle into silence? That moment tastes sweeter than any champagne. I raised my glass of water and looked around. To truth, I said simply. to resilience, to the lessons you cannot erase with lies. Some guests clapped, not out of pity, but out of genuine respect. Professors nodded firmly, others whispered my name with admiration. And for the first time in my life, I was not the family's shadow. I was the story. Thomas sank back into his chair, his head bowed slightly. Rebecca avoided my gaze, her hands fidgeting in her lap. The backyard that had once roared with laughter now sat in stunned silence. And I reveled in it. So I ask you, listening to my voice now, if the people who erased your story were forced to face the truth in front of everyone they tried to impress, what would you do? Would you let them squirm in silence, or would you savor every second of their downfall? I chose to savor it. And I wasn't done yet. There is a kind of silence that feels like victory. Not the calm after a prayer, not the hush of a church service, but the stunned, heavy silence that follows a truth no one expected. That was the silence that fell over my brother's backyard. 200 guests, frozen in place. Forks suspended halfway to mouths. Champagne glasses trembling in hands. Even the band in the corner lowered their instruments as though the music itself had no place in this moment. All eyes were on me. And for the first time in 85 years, those eyes weren't filled with pity or mockery. They were filled with awe. With disbelief. With shame. I let them stare. After decades of invisibility, I wanted them to see me fully. Not the dropout. Not the failure. Not the burden. But Eleanor Miller, the woman who had carried, sacrificed, and built quietly in the shadows, only to step into the light when no one expected it. Daniel clapped first. A slow, deliberate sound. His palms struck together once, twice, 3 times. His friends joined in, and soon a small section of the crowd was applauding me, genuinely applauding me. But the rest sat stiff, caught between the stories they had believed and the truth unfolding in front of them. I glanced toward the professors. Their faces held no mockery now. Only respect. Some even looked angry on my behalf, as though they regretted not stepping in sooner when they heard my brother's cruel jokes. And then there was Rebecca. My daughter sat rigid in her chair, her eyes wide, her lips parted. She looked like someone who had just realized the ground beneath her wasn't solid after all. For years, she had carried my silence like a shield, using it to justify her own distance from me. But now, that shield had shattered. Her cheeks burned red as her friends whispered behind their hands. Thomas, my brother, my betrayer, looked worse. His pride had always been his armor, his shield against the world. But in that moment, stripped of applause, stripped of laughter, he looked small. His hand trembled around his champagne glass. He wouldn't meet my eyes. And oh, how I savored that sight. Do you know what it feels like to watch the scales finally balance? To watch the years of mockery turn back on the ones who mocked you. It doesn't erase the pain, but it makes the pain worth carrying. I stood tall, letting the silence linger. Letting it sting. Letting it do what words could never do. And then, slowly, I smiled. Because the truth is, revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's as simple as silence, the kind that forces people to confront what they've done. The professors approached me first, shaking my hand, congratulating me warmly. I heard one say, "You are the kind of story Harvard should be proud to honor." Behind me, I felt Rebecca's shame. I felt Thomas's defeat. And I knew, without a doubt, that this was only the beginning of their regret. So I'll ask you, listening now, if your betrayers were forced to sit in silence while the truth of your worth shined for everyone to see, would you pity them? Or would you let them drown in the silence they created? I chose the latter. And the silence that day was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. When the applause from the professors faded and the whispers of admiration spread through the tent, I finally allowed myself to look directly at the two people who had wounded me most. My daughter. My brother. The faces of regret. Rebecca sat frozen, her posture stiff as a statue. Her hands twisted nervously in her lap, her wine glass untouched. She had always been polished, perfectly composed in public, never a hair out of place. But now? Her mask had cracked. Her eyes darted around the tent, as if searching for an escape from the whispers of her own friends. I could almost hear the thoughts racing in her head. How could I have mocked her? How could I have been so blind? And yet, she didn't dare speak. For once in her life, she had no clever words, no witty remarks. She only had silence, and shame. I wanted to pity her, but the memory of her voice, she never finished high school, was still fresh in my ears. She had stood there and laughed while others mocked me. Now she had to live with the truth written across her face for everyone to see. Then my eyes moved to Thomas. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. My brother, the golden child, the pride of the family, the man who had built his entire identity on being the educated one. His shoulders slumped. His lips pressed tight, trembling slightly. The glass of champagne in his hand was half empty, and he stared into it as if the bubbles could somehow erase what had just happened. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. For the first time in his long, self-satisfied life, Thomas had no story to spin, no lie to tell, no joke to bury me with. Do you know what it feels like to see a man who once made you small shrink under the weight of truth? To watch him realize, in front of the very people he wanted to impress, that his lies no longer held power? It was everything. And yet, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Their own regret was punishment enough. Around us, the mood of the crowd had shifted entirely. Professors lined up to shake my hand. Strangers approached to congratulate me. Even the younger students whispered with excitement about my upcoming honorary degree. The celebration was no longer about Thomas. It was about me. And the more they praised me, the more I saw Rebecca shrink in her chair, the more I saw Thomas's jaw tighten. Regret has a face. It looks like wide eyes that refuse to meet yours. It looks like lips pressed shut because the words they once spoke in arrogance can never be taken back. It looks like sweat on the brow of a man who thought he would be the only star, only to be eclipsed by the sister he mocked. So I ask you, listening now, if the people who betrayed you were finally unmasked in front of the world, would you forgive them easily? Or would you let their regret sit heavy on their shoulders until they learned the lesson themselves? As for me, I chose to let them sit in it. And oh, how heavy their regret looked that day. When the sun began to sink lower, casting long shadows across the backyard, the celebration that had begun as my brother's triumph had become something else entirely. The music was quieter now, the chatter subdued. People were still congratulating me, shaking my hand, asking questions about my work. And all the while, Thomas and Rebecca sat in silence, their regret painted across their faces. I should have felt angry. I should have wanted to shout, to rub my victory in their faces. But instead, I felt something different, a calm, almost like peace. For decades, I had been erased. For decades, I had carried the label of dropout, while my sacrifices and my quiet achievements were ignored. And now, here I was, 85 years old, standing taller than I ever had before, recognized by the very institution that had crowned my brother. Do you know what that feels like? It feels like reclaiming your name after a lifetime of being silenced.